Hello, and welcome to another Wednesday fully live episode of Hacking with Friends. My name is Cody Kinsey. I'm a security researcher at Varonis, and today, by audience request, we have on our expert, Killian, who is here to talk about any questions you want, but especially if you have any questions about our macro attack that we did, featuring basically how you can write a macro script to open any application you want on a target computer. Killian, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much, Cody. It's great to be on with you guys again. I apologize I missed you guys last week, but I'm glad the audience wanted to have me back. Thank you.
Yeah, so I also want to shout out and say hello to everyone in the chat. Again, we're fully live today, so if you have any questions, 8-Bit Oni has been very, very active in Mike's chat, in Mike's show as well as ours. So if you have any questions, let us know. Also good to see Nick here again, John Doe, very common name, Gene, and everybody else in the chat. Again, if you have questions while we are live, feel free to shout them out in the chat. We'll see them and try to respond to them. And yeah, it's always fun to hang out with you guys in the middle of the week. Probably my favorite show that we do. So to start out, we have a couple questions that you guys have left on our YouTube channel. And our most recent Nullbyte collaboration was actually, I actually think it was supposed to feature Killian, but he was super busy that day. So at the last minute, we swapped out Stefan, who had never heard of this before and had to basically like sit there and figure out like what was going on as I presented this. So he, as the host, was basically learning about this attack at the same time I was. So we took a couple questions off of the YouTube, I guess just like conversation that was going on. And the first one was just super interesting. Also honeypots ples. So this was from MeTube. So yes, this would be an interesting escalation of any sort of attack like the one that we covered. But especially if someone does manage to break into your local network like we were showing off, having a honeypot that looks like something really juicy that someone might want to access is a great way to detect if someone does get in. In fact, there's lots of companies that will set up honeypots that look like juicy files or other sorts of things so that if someone does what I did in this example, aka starts accessing files or accessing things that look interesting as an attacker, then it's pretty easy to trick low-skilled attackers into opening something or running something or doing something that, you know, an attacker would be interested in. And, you know, I wouldn't say this is always the best defense, but it's always about having layers of defense against somebody breaking in. So one very common one I see that kind of normal people do is they'll send themselves an email that has a file in it that's either like the file itself has like a tracking link in it, or the email itself might have a tracking link in it where it loads like a web page or so, or an image from a web page that triggers a canary token or something like that when it's open. And that could be, you know, personal, confidential, social security information or something like that. And an attacker who gets access to your email and is scrolling back through stuff might open that and trigger the token. And this is the kind of thing that a normal person might use. Or they might download the attachment, and when they open it on their computer, it might trigger and let you know that, hey, somebody has downloaded and accessed this. So there's ways that normal people can use this just on their accounts and stuff like this, but there's also ways you can use it to prevent the sort of network attack that I was showing off. And again, if you haven't seen this, it is on the Nullbyte channel. It's also on the SecurityFWD channel, but this was an attack lab I came up with that I do not wish on anyone to have to perform, because there are so many moving pieces, and there's like a Raspberry Pi 400, there's a virtual machine, there's like 2 network adapters. It was a mess, but everything seemed to have worked. And what I did was I detected a Wi-Fi network that seemed interesting, maybe for an office, a business, a local government, something like that. I broke into it because it had a pretty weak password. And then I scanned the network, identified interesting services, broke in, and ransomwared an entire FTP server. Now, if one of those was maybe a canary token, the person who was operating this might realize that somebody was in their network and doing things they shouldn't be doing before the real damage was done. So at least it would give them a chance to know, hey, I need to lock this down because somebody's using the Wi-Fi network or is using some other method of access to get into stuff that they shouldn't be getting into. So I wanted to show off a project I thought was interesting. Let me find it. If we go to my screen really quickly, I saw this today, and I'm also going to be going over this on like the weekly like roundup of like interesting stuff. But this guy has made like a honey proof of concept. So often in InfoSec, like people will publish proof of concepts to show like how a certain exploit works. And this person is basically taking advantage of the fact that like nobody really checks that code before running it, or at least a lot of people don't. So this person made a proof of concept that itself is a honeypot. So he's basically figuring out how many people are interested in, utilizing this attack by putting an attack inside the attack. I guess it's not really an attack. It's more of like a trigger to let you know if someone's running it. But if you wanted to like release something that purports to do something really damaging and then just monitor how many people are willing to actually run that malicious piece of code, then this is an interesting way of studying the motivations of security researchers and looking at who is downloading and running proof of concepts that say that they're going to maybe give you illicit access to someone's computer. So, pretty funny. I think that canary tokens continually surprise me by how they can be used as honeypots. And in this case, hiding it inside a proof of concept and then putting it out there so people can, apparently either use it to test this exploit or maybe go after somebody else with the exploit, I think is a very funny way of doing this. Okay.
It's almost like like honeypot inception, almost to a certain extent. Is this and Cody, I know you're showing on your screen. Is this like a code that he's offered that someone can download off of GitHub, or where does this hosted at?
Yeah, so this is on GitHub, and the details on this are still a little thin. I haven't dug completely the whole thing where I've actually found the proof of concept, but this is a proof of concept hosted on GitHub that is claiming to be relevant to a recently disclosed vulnerability. So the thought here is if a bunch of people download it and try to use it to attack vulnerable computers after they maybe scan Shodan and identify them, this could give a security researcher an indication of how many people are conducting secondary attacks, or what kinds of people are the kinds of people who are basically like taking advantage of these zero-day vulnerabilities to develop malware or deploy malware. So it's kind of interesting in just threat research, because it allows researchers to understand, like, if you put out a proof of concept and let anybody use it, it's actually very common that like intelligence agencies and all these other like hacking groups that have a big budget will use common publicly available proof of concepts, provided that they work, because it leaves less of a fingerprint. They don't have to develop their own stuff. And if everybody's using that piece of code, it doesn't uniquely identify them. But if you, embed it with a honeypot, then it kind of gives the people who are defending against that sort of thing a little bit more information about who's out there trying to use these things that people just drop on GitHub to maybe piggyback a ransomware attack or something nasty. So I think this is just like hilarious. Yeah, you're right. Like inception of honeypots where you've just hidden it so far in this thing that like the hacker downloads it and thinks they're doing something bad, but in fact they're just telling somebody else about their intentions.
Right. I guess they need like a have I been pwned for this type of thing, so you can go and look and see if like I got caught. Like when new exploits come out, sometimes I'll grab the code if it's on GitHub and say, hey, what does this look like in my lab environment? So that's something to keep in mind next time I go to GitHub and grab some code to test things out.
Yeah, I've had to adopt a pretty stringent series of like looking at like how many stars are here, like are there any comments that are concerning about this? I'll like maybe look through the code a tiny bit, but if there's a proof of concept that just doesn't work, I'm just like, well, that's not good. Like not only did it not work, but I also don't know what it did. Like that's probably bad.
Right.
So yeah, this is just something that it's worth keeping an eye out. If you're in the security community and you're excited to try out new proof of concepts, just know that you never know what's in there unless you look at the code. And if you don't understand the code, then you are taking a risk. So even if the code is open source, doesn't mean that someone's actually checked it out for you. So yeah,
right,
a little bit of risky business. All right,
and some of that too is
away
just,
from my screen now.
To take that into account is if you're going to do this research, do it in a closed lab environment. I know, Cody, you and I talk about this all the time with our attack labs and things like that. Don't do it on a production network. Don't do it at work. Put it somewhere else.
Oh yeah, yeah. If you want to try all of this awesome stuff that we're showing you, please don't do it on your like work computer or your work network, because they will have like an intrusion detection system or like some other software or Varonis perhaps, and they will detect it and they will not like it, and it will automatically be flagged, and it will get your work account locked down, and it will probably get you a conversation with whoever does security at your company. So one question was that we just got in the live chat is, how do you get an internship in the cybersecurity field? Well, I mean, my answer would be if you're going to school for something related to cybersecurity and you have a strong interest in it, that certainly helps. And I also found that when I was going to school, I got involved in clubs of computer science and other sorts of student organizations that gave me a little bit more advocacy and like a reason to, like an official reason to contact some of these businesses I might want to work with or partner with. So for me, being in school for something relevant to cybersecurity and also being part of like an academic community or like a student organization or even like a community organization like a hackerspace gave me enough of an in to do things that would get the attention of these companies, like participate in a hackathon or even organize a hackathon to show them that, you know, I was really interested in this field and I had the qualities that would make me a good, you know, intern or employee or something like that. So some of it is just presenting yourself well and taking advantage of whatever opportunities you have in your school or in your community to be involved in cybersecurity, so you can show like you're a self-starter and you can basically take on projects by yourself. People really like that. But if that's not an option for you, then Killian, perhaps you have some other ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of times organizations, and I know we do it too, offer programs or sponsor programs that give certain groups of people opportunities to intern. So we've done ones that sponsored like wrestling programs, and then we actually brought on a number of folks that came out of that program on as interns. So take a look at that, depending on where you're at. If you're still in high school and going to college soon, that could be a good opportunity. Some of the other ways too is, Cody, you touched on this a little bit, is join like a professional organization or like a local security group. I just had I had a conversation with a local security group yesterday, actually, and it was a great chance to interact with folks in the field. So kind of check around the requirements for that too. There are a lot of different opportunities that you'll get introduced to, organizations like us and others, where we'll come and we'll present and we'll talk about security topics. And that's a great way to introduce yourself again to the wider audience.
Yeah, another thing that we did was we just hosted a little CTF where we taught people a little bit about, you know, security, and then we tried to keep it really easy so that everybody could participate using school computers. And we even, I think we had the Chief Information Security Officer for the city of Santa Monica come and like teach everybody a little bit of Linux basics, which was super cool because she's a really awesome lady. And it was awesome. Like we actually had the highest like mixture of like women that came in and were like participating. So when we went out later and said, hey, like we organized this event, you know, most companies that looked at the pictures of our event were just like, how did you get this many like, you know, people that are really hard to get to come out to cybersecurity events to come out? And that started the conversation and showed that, hey, like I like this sort of stuff. I want to put things together in my spare time. I already do this. You can trust me to like, you know, not mess up something that you give me, because here's an example of me not messing up something that went great. I find that often people will do this, but they won't take pictures of the stuff that they do. Even if you're getting a group of 10 students together to talk about cybersecurity stuff or doing something small and local, these are really great ways of showing a company you might want to work with that you know, you are already interested in this stuff and you do the sort of stuff that they do professionally in your spare time. Like that really, if you haven't had work experience, I feel like is probably the best way of showing someone your passion and what you're willing to do if they were going to give you a job. So, you know, it's a little bit taxing to be in school and also take on students' obligations, like, you know, going into a club or something like that. But I find it also gives you the ability to advocate for yourself outside of just being a student. And that little bit of legitimacy of being part of a student organization really can help you out if you need to connect with, you know, a larger professional organization you want to work at. So another question we got was, what Linux distribution would you recommend for anybody that wants to switch from Debian to Linux? This question perplexes me on its face, but I understand that if you are just getting started with Linux, and the reason it perplexes me is Debian is actually a Linux system, so, or a fork of Linux. So if you wanted to switch from a Debian-based system to another fork of Linux or another branch of Linux, then I'm sure all the Arch people would say that you should probably check out Arch Linux. And in fact, when it comes to Manjaro, I would actually agree with them. Based on the series of different like operating systems we covered in our series that we did with James, he really found that Manjaro is one of the friendliest and best supported operating systems outside of the ones you would expect, like Ubuntu. So if you don't want to use a Debian-based system like Ubuntu, Kali Linux, or just straight up Debian, then you can always go on another branch of Linux and try out Black Arch if you want to brag about it a lot in public, or Manjaro if you just want to have a great experience but also take advantage of a lot of the things that Arch Linux has to offer. Now that being said, there's lots and lots and lots of different types of Linux and other operating systems out there. Of course, we tried out Temple OS and we loved it. So that might be the right operating system for you if you have a Temple to run. But if you don't have a Temple to run, then there's many different types of operating systems that if you're a paranoid person, maybe use Cubes OS. Once you learn how to use it, it's actually pretty easy to use, but it does work completely different from any operating system you might have used before. So it really depends on what are your goals, and also what is your concern? Why are you using Linux? Is it because you want to be ultra secure and have everything locked down? Or is it because you want to have a great user experience, but maybe you're tired of Debian, you want to see what else is out there? For one of those, you want to use Cubes, and for another one, maybe you want to use, I don't know, Parent Security. Actually, no, Parent Security OS is also Debian based, so that one's out as well. So I would just recommend Manjaro then. Killian, do you have any recommendations for like Linux operating systems if you wanted to try something outside of Debian?
Sure. So, I mean, I guess my main question is what's the kind of end goal? If you're in more of the corporate world like I tend to be, I would use maybe a Red Hat based system. So if you don't pay for Red Hat by itself, CentOS is a good option, or even Fedora Core, which is their free or their open source version that everyone forgot about. That was big a couple years ago. And just in general, at least for general computing, if I'm going to use Linux and I want to be lazy, I always liked SUSE Linux. But that's maybe I just like the little lizard.
So we have a question. How many times would you go over material until you're comfortable with it? So that's a great question. For me, I have to be able to teach it to another person until I'm comfortable. And that's like my watermark for when I've mastered a skill. If I can turn around and teach it to a beginner and explain like some troubleshooting steps and other things that might come up while doing it, and I understand like what is happening the whole way around, that's about the point at which I feel comfortable with the topic. Now, how do I do that? Well, I started writing tutorials because, it was just a good way for me to digest the information and repeat it in my own voice. And then I found out that, hey, people actually pay you to write those sorts of tutorials. So I got a job doing that. And then I started making videos, and the rest is kind of history, and that's why I'm here now. So if it's helpful to you to teach other people, or in order to digest and process the information of maybe a new tool or a new technique or something like that, it's been super successful to me, and it also develops a skill that eventually somebody might pay for. So even if like your YouTube channel gets like 5 views and like has 10 subscribers, it's still a great way for you to practice yourself to make sure that you understand the content, and then if somebody asked you a question about it, you would be able to answer it, which I think is kind of the minimum of being able to master or understand a topic. Killian, what about you? When do you feel comfortable with the material that you're going over when it's brand new to you?
It's funny that you say that, because I have a similar type of process. But even still, and Cody, we're on this together fairly often. We've done attack labs and things like that. I always still get super nervous, no matter how many times I've done it, when I'm giving it back to people, because there's always, typically when we're interacting with an audience, there's always something that I feel like I can learn. And I guess one of the things that no matter how much I practice, and this is a little bit of a tangent, but you have to be humble. Because I know, Cody, I come on your show and I see like you doing some of these Wi-Fi things. I'm like, I know a little bit, but I know Cody's an expert. I know there's always somebody out there who knows a little bit more than me. So I want to make sure that no matter kind of how much I practice and rehearse, I'm open to learning more information, even if it's live or, when I'm talking to customers or prospects or just, security industry people, to have people kind of go, hey, well, did you ever consider this? Or did you know that it actually, maybe I'm simplifying it a little bit, which is part of what I do in terms of teaching things back. So having that open mind and kind of going through it and even listening to different people cover the topics really helps as I internalize it and I practice it.
Yeah, I think that's critical, because InfoSec is so big. It's invariable that like you're going to specialize in a certain area because it's just so big. I know a lot about Wi-Fi hacking, but as soon as we go into your attack labs, I'm like, I don't know how Active Directory works. Like, it's complicated. Like, there's a lot of moving pieces, and it's beautiful. Like, it works great. But like coming from a Linux person who mostly has Mac OS and like Linux experience, Windows is really confusing in the ways that it does a lot of things. And it's taking me a while to totally relearn an area that I've never had a use for before. So even though, I might be this like Wi-Fi expert compared to somebody who specialized in another area, I really can't get that cocky, because I get all of my information from people who like went to school for 8 years for like programming and Wi-Fi and all this other stuff. And now like I talk with them and they teach me stuff. So, this is all about processing information, taking joy from understanding it and applying it. And that's really the best part of doing this sort of stuff. If you can enjoy the information you're taking down and processing, you will become an expert in some area of InfoSec where you can get paid. It really is just about how much extra work you're willing to put in because you enjoy it and you get something out of it. So really for me, that's the best way for me to retain information is I have to enjoy processing it and I have to find a way to use it that makes me enjoy understanding it, I guess, because some of the stuff, quite frankly, is very dry. It wasn't until I got like and this is actually answering our next question, which is, what skills would you learn if you wanted to get started with hacking? Would you learn programming, or would you learn like Linux utilities and using these tools? I would learn Linux utilities and doing tools because, frankly, once you learn the concepts around something and once you enjoy those things, the rest comes very naturally. If you are going to start with programming, which by and large has nothing to do with hacking up until a certain point, you have so many things you're going to have to go through that if that's not appealing to you, you're going to get bored and tired and annoyed very, very quickly, just the way that I did when I was forced to learn C++, when I just wanted to learn Python so I could make some janky tools. So I felt very discouraged, and I was in a group of totally different people who were like wizards at math and like had all these skills that I didn't have. But fortunately, my lazy hacker mentality enabled me to learn tricks to do the same things that everyone else was doing that kind of amazed them, but did it in a different way. But it took a lot of work. I find that people that take the time to learn Linux utilities and networking, bash scripting, like some of these very basic skills will get you a job well before somebody who's like 3 years into programming will have some of the same skills that are frankly critical to being able to like test networks and test the kind of things that companies are really worried about. So I would say like networking skills and Linux skills are absolutely more critical than programming skills. I am learning programming skills after I learn those things, and I can confidently say that unless I'm going to go into a job where I'm writing security tools constantly, like programming would not be as much of a benefit to me as just general understanding of how to use Linux utilities. What would you say, Killian?
I would agree, and I mean, I guess it depends on what your goals are too. Now, I did go to school for this. I have a programming background, although I've never really coded that much professionally. But I typically find, at least in more of my professional roles, that having a solid understanding of, like you said, the Linux utilities that are built in, or even PowerShell if you're in the Windows world, really gets you a long way to go. And you can start to build up some of those coding fundamentals if you want to. Typically, when I have to tackle a problem, more often than not, I can either do it with a couple scripts or a PowerShell script that I put together. And answering the previous question just a little bit too, that's how I tend to learn. I need to have some type of objective to work towards, so I can measure my success in a way. If I see something cool, or somebody asked me for help with something. Good example, completely unrelated to security, is one of our coworkers had what was it? It was an output of a text translation from a stream, and they needed to reformat it so we could create captions. And it would have been a massive, awful project. And said, hey, is there anything you can do to help? So I said, okay, wait a minute. I know a little bit about PowerShell. I know some of the string manipulations in there. And I was able to build up a little script that went through and kind of rewrote it and formatted it correctly. But you can take those exact same skills and apply them to security research. So think about something like finding sensitive data in an organization. You can do that with a couple lines of PowerShell if you know how to write it, do a little basic programming, like a little loop maybe, or directory traversal, and then a little regular expression. So you can kind of build and go back and forth on it. But set yourself a goal. Set something that you think is achievable, and work towards it that you could maybe improve in your daily life. And I think that's what motivates me to decide where to learn and kind of focus my attention.
Yeah, I will also say, I didn't mention PowerShell, but I would say like learning PowerShell, bash scripting, and Linux utilities, those three things. My friend, who was also really into Linux, we used to go to computer science club meetings, and we would just punk the computer science club like students, because they would have challenges on the screen for, all right, write some code, whatever language you want to do this particular operation on this file, or create this particular file. And we would just use bash scripting, and it would always be shorter and tighter and more efficient than anything else, because it's just using built-in Linux utilities. And it's not fair, but we would always like win by like a huge margin and like have to be disqualified. And we thought that was very funny. So it was a very hacker thing to do. And again, you can get by with bash scripting and PowerShell and a lot of these other things that other people need to go to school to learn programming for, because a lot of these more common functions are just either covered by excellent utilities that are easy to use and string together, or there's other ways of doing it that computer science people just don't know about. So I think that's very funny.
And the other thing to consider too is, again, what is your ultimate goal? And I'll caution that if you want to get into like malware research and decompiling, you probably want to learn about coding and the structures under the hood, so you understand that. And it's the joke is it's all buffer overflows. And if you understand like C or C++, well, more C maybe for that, C++ has put some bounds in, but how it kind of stacks up in the back end and what a buffer flow is or overflow is can be really helpful, again, if you're passionate about like malware research and decompiling, looking that type of stuff. So
yeah, absolutely. So another question we have, how does internships work for someone who's over 40? Well, they actually work great, because if you have existing skills in a different industry, I guarantee that industry, or at least one of the industries you worked in before, has some sort of need for cybersecurity, and often gets professionals who have no idea how things work on the ground. And so they don't work well in that industry, because they are trying to do cybersecurity, but they don't understand the needs of everybody who's working there. So I find that people who have previous experience in some other industry, be it retail, restaurants, like I have a lot of experience in music venues. Like I can go through and do a cybersecurity audit of a music venue like none other, because I understand exactly how they work and where all the weak points are. I know where the data is processed. I know where the credit cards are processed. I know where all the problems lie, because I've been in that industry for a long time. So if you've worked in another industry, if you're 40 and you're looking to switch over, all that stuff that you think is like wasted time is not wasted time. It's information that's going to help you in that career, because it gives you nuanced insight into something that somebody who just went to school for cybersecurity and then goes directly into the career field will not have the information to understand, and they will have to do a lot of painful learning and probably create a lot of friction until they do, which is why often cybersecurity people might get a bad reputation, because they might only know about their field and not about the field that they're trying to help out. This is very common, that cybersecurity people get frustrated and angry because their suggestions aren't taken up. But if you've worked in that industry, for 10 years, you can probably explain to them why they need to fix this in a language that they understand. So trust me when I say, if you're switching careers, you're often in a much better position than somebody who is fresh out of school for cybersecurity, especially if you can show that you were successful in that career, or that some of these skills like organization, project management, documentation, report writing, if you can translate that stuff over to cybersecurity, I think you'll find yourself in a good position. So if you're looking to switch, like a lot of these skills are transferable, especially people skills, social engineering, and other sorts of just skills that you develop while working in a job where you just kind of have to do that. These skills really help in cybersecurity, because often they're in short supply. So they can give you an advantage in a lot of ways that you might not expect.
Just to touch on that too, you brought up a really powerful point that I want to just really hammer home. I was talking to some CISOs recently, and one of the themes that came up is, in order for organizations to adopt security practices and not see them as blockers or roadblocks to productivity, is to make sure that there's buy-in from the lines of business in the company. So if you have that deep business side, and it could be in all sorts of areas, you have a leg up, because you can communicate, as Cody said, you can communicate that to the security people. And if you start to learn kind of to bridge that language, there is a tremendous need for that. Because again, you need to get that buy-in for the business for these security things to be successful. And the security people need that buy-in, of course, need to understand the feedback, why something will be adopted versus not. So that is a great opportunity. And also, Cody, I think you and I talked about this a while ago, or maybe a very early stream, at least when I was on, about some of our friends and coworkers that we've seen come in from different industries.
Yeah,
so
we had a lot of musicians.
Yeah, we did. But again, it takes a lot of skills, and having the specialized knowledge can translate if you're willing to put in some of the time to do the learning and build that bridge.
Yeah, so we have a question that hits a little close to home for me. Can we directly learn Python instead of going via C++? Man, okay, yes, I wanted to do this. And my community college I went to said that it was impossible. They're like, you're going to have to do 2 years of C++. And I was just like, no, I will do 1 year of C++. And they were like, fine. So we both didn't like what was happening, but we managed to work something out. I took a year of C++, and it is a very discouraging language. It will make you feel like you don't understand computer science. It will shout at you. It will leave you cryptic error messages. It will basically, you will write something and it will be perfect. It'll feel perfect. There's no flaws. You read it and then you run it and one semicolon or one comma or one thing is out of place, and it will fail to give you the information to figure out what's going on, and you will decide that you're not a computer scientist, you're a failure, and you're an imposter. It's like boot camp for introducing your brain to code. It basically lets you know that the computer is a brutal machine with no forgiveness and will punish you at every opportunity. This doesn't sound great, but it prepares you and it teaches you enough about computer science to have a foundation where if you're willing to put at least like maybe 6 months of learning C++ in, you will understand languages like Arduino on a foundational level and be able to do more interesting stuff with hardware. That's really the biggest benefit for me. And also you'll have a better underlying understanding of how computer science works and all the nice fancy stuff that Python is going to do for you. Now, as soon as you switch from C++ to Python, you are going to write a piece of code that feels wrong. It's all indented wrong. Like you feel like there's mistakes. You're going to try to run it and it will run flawlessly and you won't understand. It's going to be a confusing experience because Python is very friendly. It tries to convince you that you should be a computer scientist. Come on in, like absolutely sure. You can write very trashy Python code with almost no understanding of computer science below how Python works, and you, provided your system has enough resources, will probably get away with it. So if you just want to learn how to do proof of concepts and you don't care that you're missing out on something that I think is kind of at least lets you speak the same language as computer scientists and also play with really cool hardware like the ESP8266 or other pieces of hardware that you can program, do cool sensor stuff with, I think it's worth it to go through the pain. But for the rest of your life, you will, when you're going to run a piece of code that you just wrote, you're going to like tremble and like press the button. And then if it runs the first time, you're going to be like, something's deeply wrong. I was like, I don't know what's wrong here, but something I did is wrong. When I switched into electrical engineering from computer science after going through C++, I would wire all my stuff, I would switch it on, it would start running properly, and I'm like, I've made a mistake so deep that I don't even know what it is because everything seems to be running fine. And they didn't understand my pessimism, but purely it was C++. So take that as you will. I think it's worth going through the pain. It's like boot camp. Like it just puts you on the same page as computer science students. It teaches you the basics and lets you work with hardware. But if you did just want to get away with doing API stuff, networking stuff, you could probably get away with networking and Python, but don't expect to be doing very much interesting stuff with your code if you don't also learn networking. Because if you learn Python without networking, you pretty much just got to either use an API or stay local to your computer, and that's no fun. So there are kind of layers to this that you might not anticipate when you're just going in. Man, I thought I could just learn Python and make proof of concepts too, but it turns out there was not a lot, but a little bit more work behind it. And I think the way I went about it, learning a bit of C++ and then learning Python and then learning networking is my recommended way of doing it because it worked out pretty well for me.
Yeah, I've had experience with all of them. I've spent many an hour debugging C++ code and stepping it through line by line to find that stupid semicolon or something that didn't quite work right. But it is helpful and foundational, and it depends really on your goals too. Cody, as you mentioned, I guess it depends on what you're working towards. For me, to do a quick and dirty program, in the Windows world, I always preferred C#. Because it was easy to make interactive GUIs and stuff like that. You can kind of you can spin that up very easily and much faster. Java's not terrible for that either, especially if you want to be web-based. But if you want to kind of a career that's more low-level or hardware-based, you're going to want to learn some of the the C++ and the object-oriented stuff, and sometimes even C, which is that's a different animal altogether.
This is, I think, my favorite question we've had on the stream so far. Since there are so many hacking tutorials, it overshadows how to actually hide your tracks during attacks, since a lot of them are very noisy. Could you point out some of the prominent noisy attacks? That's actually great because since we both work at Varonis is specifically a product to detect like noisy attacks that give a lot of indication that something's going on. Like all the obvious stuff we have to have covered. And then beyond that, there's a bunch of fancy stuff that detects much more subtle, more advanced attacks as well. But the bare minimum we have to have covered is these sorts of attacks that are very obvious that like other people could also catch with much less sophisticated intrusion detection systems. So Killian, what do you think, what would you feel like some of the more noisy attacks that are detectable that we see are?
The absolute noisiest one that we see, and that probably everybody who's ever turned a computer has seen, is like a brute force attack. They can, I mean, if you're not trying to be stealthy, you might as well just send up a flare and say, hey, I'm up to something. Pound it on a single account, you're going to lock it out very quickly. If you move on to the next one, you do it again. It's very easy to detect, very, very noisy. And I think that's the biggest one that we typically see kind of in the wild, because if you have something exposed to the internet, it's fairly low cost to try some of these things. And then kind of on the flip side, if you want to be like super like under the radar, any of the DNS attacks that we see is the complete opposite. DNS is noisy inherently based on the way it works. It's often let out kind of to and from the internet. So there's a lot of opportunity for an attacker to hide in their kind of tracks in a noisy protocol, I guess, or system or service.
Yeah, definitely. So for me, it would be focusing on Wi-Fi attacks. Deauthentication attacks are super easy to detect and are probably the number one thing that people will do, because you can do it with a $2 device. You can kick any device off the network. You can try to get the password. Often people will find out about this and try to harass their neighbors or something. So this is a very common attack that's very, very easy to find out. It's also very easy to discover the source of it. In fact, I have one. We use the Andromeda deauthor, which allows you to mount a directional antenna to sniff around and find the physical location of a device that was broadcasting malicious packets. So, this is an attack that is really easy to do, but with I think this is like $30 on Spacehoon's store, we could actually track down the source and be like, hey buddy, knock it off. Another one would be obviously password spraying. We see this all the time. Like as soon as you make accounts available to the internet, people will try to log in. And of course you can try to do rate limiting and other sorts of stuff to reduce this, but password spraying is a very, very, very common thing that is easy to do. Another thing I would say is network scanning. I worked at Uber very briefly, and I definitely got asked why I was scanning their Wi-Fi network. As soon as I just connected, did like a little ARP scan. I was like, oh, that's interesting. And tried to Nmap something. I was like, oh, cool. And then I immediately was just like, hi, we noticed suspicious IP activity from your computer. Please explain the following. And I was just like, oh, damn. Oh, and I was like, oh, sorry, my computer just does that. And they're just like, oh, okay, great. But after that, I was just like, I should not do that again. So, scanning on the network often will be interpreted as a hostile act if you're working for a company that is paranoid or just otherwise secured. Like, why would somebody in this particular department be doing a network scan if it has nothing to do with their job? There you go. So I would say network scanning, password spraying, deauthentication attacks against Wi-Fi, and yeah, I would say that those are probably probably the most detectable ones, because a lot of the other ones, at least when it comes to Wi-Fi, require less interaction or can be more subtle. But yeah, I would say maybe another one would be on a local network, ARP spoofing and DNS spoofing. If you are conducting ARP spoofing and DNS spoofing, you're sending out a lot of packets, and there are ways to detect that on systems that are looking for it. So ARP spoofing attacks and DNS spoofing attacks are very malicious, and they're noisy enough that they're probably going to be looked for by most intrusion detection systems. So that would be another one I would say will probably get you caught if you're just running it willy-nilly on someone else's network. But that was a really good question. I don't think we've got that question before. But as working for a company that deals with other companies' security, a lot of these people will report back to us what kinds of attacks are the most common for them. So it's interesting to see the data on that. So one question was whether or not we're open to interns. I have no idea. Killian, do you know what happens if someone wants to be an intern here or is interested?
A lot of intern questions. That is an excellent question. I know we do take on interns. We've had a number of them over the years that I've been here. If you're curious about that, check out the Varonis.com page, and I think there's a career section, and I believe they might list the interns there. I don't know if it's all the time or what the process looks like, but they might. I would imagine if we're looking for them, it would probably be posted there.
Let's see. So one question was, do I have a Facebook or Instagram? I'm not a huge fan of Facebook as a company. Just personally, that's just me. So I downloaded the data and closed out my Facebook, I think 2 years ago, and then I like wound down my Instagram, so that is now just like private and only a couple friends are on, and I'm trying to close it out. So yeah, I'm not a huge fan of that company or what they do with my data, or who they sell it to, or what kind of ads they pump into my face constantly by just blaring them in front of the content I actually want to see. So no, like the only evil company I'm really currently signed up with is TikTok. So if you want to go find my TikTok, it's Hackbyte, HAKBYTE. But aside from that, that is actually one of the questions we had. So one of the questions we had that was actually DM'd to me was about TikTok in particular. Let me actually find it. I think it's this one. Okay, so if we switch to my screen, this is my favorite part about this message is I get like literally hundreds of these like questions, and I never know if they're crazy or not. So sometimes I don't get to answer them, but sometimes people get like mad about the fact that I don't have time to respond. So the last part was just a kind of passive aggressive, good talk, take care. But the original question, which was apparently asked back in 2020, was, do you advise that I get rid of TikTok? And so my answer is kind of, the reasons that I don't like Facebook is because it's able to very precisely measure what you do and don't like. And while they will tell you some of what they're recording about your information, they can also plug all this stuff into a formula that they don't disclose with you, and you don't know how it's used, and you don't know how it can influence you. So TikTok very aggressively attempts to classify your interests, and it will do this in some pretty weird ways. There's some speculation that it watches your face when you're watching videos, and it knows exactly how you're reacting to these videos. So it's able to pigeonhole your interests pretty quickly and act as like an A/B test to very quickly lock in the kinds of stuff you like. The problem with this is it finds out what kind of vehicles you will basically believe or accept information in. And that gives it the ability to start sending you messages that might be kind of fringe, or might kind of pull you in one direction or another. And this kind of influence, especially when used with young people, I think might not be so ethical. The same way that Facebook is often accused of radicalizing older people that take their newsfeed as something that can be trusted and absolute. If you figure out what kind of people or what kind of videos somebody trusts and then start feeding them information in that format, I see a kind of conflict of interest here in terms of like neutrally providing information versus customizing someone's feed versus making it so that a message is going to be received and favorably processed. So that kind of benefit to advertisers, where they can figure out what kind of thing will make you buy something by having you watch thousands of videos over a long period of time, I don't think that's necessarily good for you. And I think it fundamentally erodes some of your choices because you're being carefully studied by a very expensive machine in order to provide the most influencing message to you. And fundamentally, I don't think that people should want to be pulled around by money. So that's the danger here when it comes to Facebook, when it comes to TikTok. Anything that is giving you this thing for free, you are the product. You are being very carefully studied and measured and otherwise processed so that that information can be used to sway you into making decisions. And as that technology gets more and more advanced, it can become a problem for people who don't understand that they really are giving up something to use the service. So no, I haven't shut down my TikTok. I'm a content creator mostly on TikTok, but I'll admit I definitely will get depressed and scroll on TikTok for long periods of time. And the problem with it is it learns about you so quickly. And it will try to pull you into rabbit holes. Just an example, I liked one joke that an Irish person was making about the British, and suddenly I got pulled into the part of TikTok that wants to secede from the UK. So I didn't want that, but suddenly, I was hearing all these revolutionary songs and stuff that I'm like, wow, it's very easy to get pulled into these rabbit holes as soon as the algorithm thinks it knows something about you. So, take it as you will. I still use it, but I download my data from it every month or two to see what information it's learning about me, and I try to limit my time on it. And I also try not to consume any news. I primarily use it for entertainment, but it's really, I think, a conflict of interest to start getting your primary source of information from it, or to use it for too long and give it too much data. just my take on it. But yeah, I wanted to give this person a full response because it seems like they were upset I didn't respond. So sorry about that.
I think you make a really good point there too, Cody. In terms of, I don't have the socials for many of the same reasons, but it requires effort to get kind of the right information. And the running joke that we have, at least here for me, is I clicked on an article for like a spaghetti sauce the one time, and now all of the time I get suggested news stories for spaghetti sauce, and it shows up in my ads all the time. And it's funny, and it's the running joke here because yeah, I clicked on that one thing, and it's trying to really kind of side me with the spaghetti sauce, big spaghetti sauce or whoever it is. But it's such a weird thing, and I'm aware of it, and I'm cognizant that it's happening, but a lot of people I don't think do. And that's the scary part, is that, and like you said, it's probably not good to kind of trust one of these platforms for your news, because while spaghetti sauce is not particularly malicious, unless you don't like tomatoes, or maybe you're a big tomato advocate, either way. But yeah, it will profile you, and then it will kind of feed you reinforcing messages based on that interest. And again, it's something that we all need to be aware of, at least especially as security people or people interested in this industry.
Yeah, this isn't advertising that your grandparents had. This isn't just like broadcast stuff that's being sent to everyone. This is being tailored specifically for you and other people in a very narrow class like you. And the delivery mechanism here is now using like machine learning and like all this other stuff that was never available before. So we're in a totally new age of advertising, and the data that's used to help try to manipulate people is getting kind of scary. So we also had a good question in the chat I didn't want to ignore. Is Mac spoofing enough to keep anonymous during Wi-Fi attacks, such as sending deauth attacks? Well, it is at a bare minimum, you're going to want to use Mac spoofing if you're doing some sort of Wi-Fi attack, presumably for red teaming. Because you would never want to deauthenticate a device you don't have permission to, because that would be a denial of service attack, which is a crime in the United States. So, right. But assuming you do have permission to do this, it is your own device or you're red teaming, then spoofing your MAC address is a good idea. If you randomize it, then it's just harder to tell what kind of device you are, or tie it to previous network activity. If you set it to a device that's already on the network, it's very confusing because it looks like your device is the same as that other network device that was already allowed on the network. And then it might even trick intrusion detection systems into attacking that device that is already on the network and is perfectly innocent that you've been pretending to be, or rather just impersonating. So there are reasons to do this. Now, when it comes to staying anonymous, there are problems with this. So every manufacturer of a device that uses Wi-Fi changes a little bit about the way the information is put into the packet. There's what's called optional elements. And depending on what your manufacturer is, it will add or have like customized optional elements in the packets that are going out. So let's say that you spoof a device that's on the network, and you have two different packets coming out, one from the real device and one from the fake device. They will have different flavors because the optional elements, the structure of the packet will be slightly different because they're presumably using different wireless network adapters or different wireless cards. And the manufacturer of those wireless cards has set up the packets a little differently. So if you have a sophisticated intrusion detection device, it can basically smell that these packets aren't the same flavor. It's kind of like, the best way to put it, because some of these are using like machine learning to just take tons of samples of normal packets, and then when it gets a weird one, it's just like, what is this? There's issues with this. This looks right, but that looks wrong, and this I've definitely never seen before. So there are ways of still detecting you. Now, when it comes to tracking down your physical location, there's also intrusion detection systems that have multiple transmitters, and what they're able to do is localize the source. So if you were going into a school or something and you started deauthenticating, and they had an intrusion detection system that was based in all the access points that are everywhere, they would be able to do some signal measuring and probably triangulate what room you're in and maybe even what part of the room you're in. So will this keep you anonymous? Not necessarily, but it will improve your security against an undefended system. Just don't think that it's going to help you against either a sophisticated IDS that can smell the difference in the packets or something that's just trying to track your physical location. So that's a really good question. Another question was, would you guys get in trouble for demonstrating a CVE and how to exploit it? So I'm assuming you mean a proof of concept for a CVE. It would be cool to see some common CVEs that I see people using in the wild. So it depends. If this is something that the vendor has patched and like a little bit of time has gone by, so that there's not like 100,000 computers like still vulnerable to it, we probably would not get in trouble for doing that. I don't think at all, because we could just run a vulnerable version of the system. Everything would be perfectly fine. If we do, if we show how to use a proof of concept against something that there's still like a ton of computers that are still vulnerable to because the patch hasn't been out for very long, yeah, if any of those ended up being like our customers that got like hit from an attack that was like launched right after we did a show on how to use that attack, yeah, we'd get in trouble. We would get in trouble for that one. So that's kind of the line for us. If it's something that could affect a vast number of people, and it's been patched but people haven't fixed it yet, we're not going to kick those people that still haven't patched it if it's been a reasonable amount of time. But if it's been like a year and a half, that's like, they're not going to fix it. Like, and at that point, like I don't think we would get in trouble. So yeah, but would we shy away from doing a proof of concept? Like, no, absolutely not. It's just, we can't have it inadvertently affect someone like that is trying to do everything possible, but just hasn't gotten around to patching that one particular system yet.
Just on that topic, I know as a company as Varonis does attack labs where we do take customers through some of those things, and I know even in some of the episodes, Cody, I can't remember if you were with me or not, but did we do the zero logon vulnerability together? I don't remember if we did or not.
I don't think we did. No.
Okay. Well, that was one that after that came out, or very recently, that was from last year, but as soon as they released a proof of concept, I did have a closed lab, and I was able to run it and document some of that. In the guise of what we did is we showed it to our customers as part of an education event and say, listen, here's what this is. Here's why you need to be concerned. And by the way, there is a patch. Please go patch.
Right.
So it's doing it in the right way, I suppose. And that helped us a lot to learn, and helped me a lot learn some of the expand my knowledge, I guess, of Active Directory.
Maybe we could potentially, as some time goes by, adapt that and show it off on the channel. I mean, if you guys are interested in seeing proof of concepts, then like the zero logon vulnerability, like it has been a while. So like maybe that would be good to show off since we now have an audience request. See, it's good you guys ask questions. So another question we had is, how come you guys haven't done many tutorials on Android hacking using NetHunter? Seems like a portable and efficient way to get some pen testing done, and not a lot of people cover or are very outdated. Yeah, I got a device from our great moderator Zam that supports NetHunter, and I was like, all right, time to load the sucker up. And the documentation, frankly, is not great. It kind of didn't seem very straightforward to be able to do this, and it kind of, most of the documentation I saw assumed that you already knew how to do a lot of things that I hadn't done before. So I haven't messed around with like loading custom ROMs on like Android for a long time. Catching up with it was surprisingly difficult, and I've just noticed that the project doesn't have super great documentation. So that would be my only answer. I now have a compatible device. I really want to try it, and it seems like a good project. I just, like, when I have like an hour or so to do it, like it always seems that the documentation I start following ends up either fizzling out or like requires me to do something that I like don't know how to do. So if you guys know of any great documentation for setting up Kali Linux, or not Kali, Kali NetHunter, I would love to do it. I think I have like a Nexus 5 that I'm doing it on, but yeah. Just hasn't been the smoothest experience to get started quite yet. But we have done a series on hacking Android apps, which we've been doing with Nick. So if you're interested in seeing Android app hacking, we do have a great series on that, but unfortunately we haven't gone into like hacking on Android yet. We did a couple on, or earlier we did a couple on like Termux and some of the other ways of like just emulating like an Android system. And you can still do, like, my favorite thing to do is I'll run router exploit, and I'll just use it to audit any Wi-Fi network that I'm connected to. I'll just find the IP address of the router, throw a bunch of the different programs to test whether or not the router is vulnerable to something, and boom, you can use your Android phone to do some basic Python stuff, especially if it's like like API stuff. Very, very useful. OSINT tools, very useful. But when it comes to like using the wireless card, it does not work. So I would love to do more with Kali NetHunter, but I do require probably a little bit better documentation because I only have like an hour and a half to usually set it up, and I usually don't get it done. Let's see. All right, so we actually had a ton of questions that we didn't get to, which is great. I actually love getting the live questions. But let me see. Oh, so one other person said that their friend challenged them to hack his Wi-Fi network, and they run WPS. So it took about 2 seconds to crack the password. If you're interested in Wi-Fi hacking, the number one thing to make sure your router isn't running is a vulnerable version of WPS. WPS allows a hacker, if your version is vulnerable, which many still are, to basically get your password no matter how long or complicated it is for your Wi-Fi network in about 3 seconds. This has not been patched very effectively. Lots of internet service providers are still providing routers that are vulnerable to this. So if you haven't seen the pixie dust attack, or I think... Yeah, you can do Bully or Reaver, like both ones are capable of executing the pixie dust attack. It is a really interesting attack that I've showed off, I think, using the AirGetIn tool, which has these built in as well. So really, really interesting if you're into Wi-Fi hacking. Please make sure that your router doesn't have this disabled. It's definitely worth disabling because it serves no real useful function. Let's see. One question was, do you think rooting my Android is wise? No. If it's your primary phone, if you do anything personal on it, if it's not like your side phone, I would not do it. Just making it so that anything on your phone could potentially get root access is not a good idea, especially if you're doing security stuff with it. There have even been exploits where they can get code to run on your phone just by, a vulnerable Wi-Fi chip and sending out packets to where you just need to receive the packets and you don't even need to join the network. So there's lots of reasons why you don't want to just, open up root access on your phone if it is your primary device. Again, if it's a secondary device that you don't care about what happens to, sure, do it. But do not put personal data on it. Don't log into personal accounts and don't trust that phone, especially if you're going to be doing security stuff on it, because root access just opens up a whole new level of problems that can happen on a device. So there was a question about Discord. I'd love to answer it, but I haven't used Discord in a while. And I also think we're running out of time, so probably have to wrap this one up pretty soon. One question was also, how often do you review the basics? I try to go through and do stuff that forces me to do things I haven't done for a while, like at least maybe once a month, maybe once every other month. And I usually do that by teaching it or like featuring it or having a guest on that's like refreshing me on it. But yeah, I try to refresh stuff that I have to do constantly, or I feel like I'm gonna have to do constantly if I get out of the practice of programming, by just forcing myself to either learn it or teach it once a month or once every other month. And that's usually just like Linux tools that, like maybe like using Wireshark or something, just so that I don't forget the difference between a capture filter and a display filter. And I know how to use some of the shortcuts that I like to teach people, because they are really super interesting. And I'm a huge nerd for Wireshark, but if you haven't used it in a year, it's really hard to remember those fun, interesting details. And instead, it just gets really frustrating to show off. Are there any community events near the Valley anytime soon? I would love to meet with more people in the community. Sort of. So if you're talking about the Valley in LA, we're going to be heading back into Los Angeles. I don't know if we're going to be hosting an event at Null Space Labs. Things are still, it's still pandemic time, so in-person events might still be on hold. But we're looking to do at least something to try to get people together when it's safe. So you might look towards the later part of May in Los Angeles towards Null Space Labs. There might be the potential that we do something there. I would love to get some LA hackers together, because there's a good group of at least 5 or 6 or 7 of us that have been dying to do stuff again, but unfortunately just haven't been able to. So maybe in the future, I would just keep an eye on Null Space Labs, because that's definitely the best place to look for hacker events in and around the Valley. Okay, I think that's all the time we have. It's now 1, and Killian, I know you have a busy day. So I think that's going to do it for our Q&A session today. I love that almost all of our questions today were in the live chat. We barely got to dip into the ones that we had on the YouTube channel, but that's great. We really prefer to answer them live, because it gives us more to talk about on Friday. Although, might end up having to take off Friday. I think I'm going to be going on vacation. It's been a long month. So if we do end up canceling our Friday stream, then I will see you guys on Tuesday of next week. And Killian, thank you again for being on and teaching people a little bit about what it's like to get started with cybersecurity, and also just generally answering questions.
No, this was great. Thank you so much, and thank you again for the audience for inviting me back. I really appreciate it. And well, Cody, if I don't talk to you, enjoy your vacation.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's going to be our stream. Answering one last question. What are some tools, resources for recent students? Check out NoByte, check out YouTube, learn Wireshark, learn Nmap. Have fun. All right. We'll see you guys later. Bye.
Take care.